Bismillah, welcome to Savage Sufis.
So, Wakil, are we gonna do the same thing that we did the last time, where you made that joke about where we all wish our mothers washed us out?
Uh, I'm just afraid that my mom's actually going to listen to this one day, so we'll just sprinkle it in somewhere else maybe next time.
Maybe what we can do is we can ask audience members if they would like to have something else as an intro. Otherwise, we'll just stick with the Bismillah, welcome to Savage Sufis.
Where Bilal and me just talk about stuff that interests us. And maybe
And
you.
okay, so last time we had a very, very brief intro where you were out picking up your firstborn, and I was sitting in an office. So we want to try to do a better job of introducing ourselves. So let's go about doing that. Wakil and Chad, do you want to start? Give a little bit of a background about who you are, where you were raised, what you studied in school, so we can do what one of my friends said, between a humble brag and credentialing ourselves, so that people who potentially listen actually know what the baseline requisite qualifications or credentials are of those they're listening to.
I'll make it easy for him. I'm not really qualified, but I'll still introduce myself. Uh, my name is Wakil, born and raised in New York, went to school in Massachusetts where I met my good friend Bilal. Um, Technically, I'm a business major. Ended up in real estate, married, father of two. My biggest accolade in the study of Deen or Islamic knowledge is being Maulana Shakil's brother and amateur student of Deen, retired exorcist, and mediocre Pokemon card enthusiast.
You're also are you a retired or amateur retired uh, cupping specialist?
Yeah, I'm intermediate in cupping, hijama, blood, wet cupping, we call it.
Wet cupping. That's the technical term.
Yeah, technical term is wet cupping.
Mm. And any other plans for rounding out that baker's dozen, or do you need consultation from, as my dad says, the home ministry?
The home ministry is happy with a tribe of two right now, so I think we'll just leave it there for now. We'll see where it takes us.
Cool. So, is there anything else that we should address? You graduated as a business major technically, but you're in real estate. But the college you went to is the number one school in entrepreneur. Is it the number one school in entrepreneurship in the world, or just in the country? I mean, I should know this as well because I'm an
Yeah,
employee.
I believe
But
I believe it's school in the country, but it can also be number one in the world. And there's like a lot of technical aspects of how they phrase that. So there's a specific way they do it because they're number one only because they made the category. But let's not expose them for that.
yeah, we'll refrain from doing that because neither of us want to get in trouble, and we want to respect the institution that is your alma mater and is my current employer.
Yeah, I love them. So
They're a good
let me
place.
be
They're good
one of
people.
my friends. Yeah.
So yeah, myself, my name's Bilal, and I was born and raised in Massachusetts in the suburbs of Boston, not in the western part of the state. No offense to the western part of the state, just the eastern part is one that I'm more familiar with. I went to undergrad in Western Massachusetts, and then I took some graduate coursework. So I started off as an engineering major, uh, just like any other brown parents would like their child to be. And then 3 days in, I decided to drop engineering, and then I chose to apply to the business school. And then my parents were very unhappy with that decision. By the time the end of the first semester came around, I told them I was also going to take pre-med courses, and they were ecstatic about that, or elated. And then I spent my last semester studying abroad in Egypt, and I came back and I didn't really want to go to med school. And but I took some graduate coursework in public health, and then I fell into a Muslim chaplaincy position, which is where I met Ukil about a semester into it. So I've been doing that since I was 23. This is my 10th year. I was 2011. Yeah. I guess that's
Wow. Oh man.
okay. So that's a little bit about us. Now, based upon our first mini episode, I think there was some confusion about why we titled ourselves Savage Sufis. And because this is your brainchild, Wakil, why don't you go into, and you came up with the name of Savage Sufis. Do you want to go a little bit into that and maybe do a bit of an exposition about Savage Sufis and the reasoning behind that, so we can get we can give our audience a better understanding?
Yeah. So the the origin of the name pretty much is just me hanging out with a couple of people, and one of the most famous Sufis, and we can go into defining that a little bit later. But one of the most famous Sufis was, Hazrat Rumi, and everyone just talks about his poetry all the time, and it's always about love, and no one really understands where he's actually coming from. And there's a very big misconception about a Sufi being kind of a pushover or somebody you can just take advantage of. But they don't realize, when you're talking about Rumi specifically, he was a hardcore Islamic judge. He was a mufti. And in between him, like sentencing somebody to death or classifying a matter in Islam, he was writing this poetry. So there's a hardcore or very like strict aspect of the Sawaf or the spiritual path that most people don't realize. And just reclaiming that word, and like I want to say like the more raw and unfiltered aspects of it, we can go deep, like we go deeper into that a little bit later. But the raw and unfiltered aspects of what it means to be on the spiritual path, sometimes you're very straightforward, there's no beating around the bush, feels very raw, and that's where the savageness kind of technically comes from. So just reclaim the word of Sufi, not really being a pushover, and just emphasizing that sometimes you can't really beat around the bush, and that's where the savageness comes in.
Yeah, because nowadays, even I guess the best term that's used in the English vernacular is Islamic mysticism, right? Which doesn't really encompass at all, based upon what you're saying, what Sufism, Tasawwuf is really about. My brother, so Wakil and I are in a group chat, just like many of us are in group chats. And this one was started by myself. But my brother just reposted in that chat another meme, or a meme that I think we had come across a while ago, where there's a picture or a depiction of Maulana Rumi. And the quote is, "My poetry is about Allah, not your ex-girlfriend." Right? So that's what we're trying to like reclaim the term from. Would you say that's based upon what you said? Yeah.
Absolutely, because what it really is, it kind of demeans and it debases and takes away the value of actual true Sufism or the Tasawwuf or the spiritual path and just walking on it. And again, there's like so many nuances and how it is related to our religious life, our worldly life. And there's a lot of misconceptions. I think one of the biggest things is that someone who's very close to me, he's a relative, but he's like very friendly, like we're very close friends as well. He was like, "Hey, I heard your podcast, and you have the word Sufi in there. Isn't that like a deviant group? Isn't that not part of Islam?" And I had to like educate him about like where that term comes from and what that path actually is.
So based upon that, why don't we actually dive into a little bit about breaking down the name between Savage and Sufi, and why don't we delve into what Sufi means and where it comes from? Do you want to start us on that, or do you want me to? How do you want to?
I think you start off on the Sufi part, and then I'll try to piggyback off of that, or camelback. I don't know if we're going to use the word for camel, but yeah, you started off with
camelback.
Camelback it, yeah.
It was a two-hump camel. That's a Bactrian camel, right? Because there's two of us right now. We'll inshallah have other hosts on, because it's not limited to just the two of us. We're just
that group chat has a whole bunch of people. So I mean, I thought it was gonna like a round table, and of course we'll invite other people not in the group chat as well. So That's all
Yeah.
good.
We just don't want to name names right now. We don't want to commit someone else to something that we're starting at the moment. But of course,
Oh,
we
I'm
welcome.
definitely we're getting him on here. I'm gonna put my brother here no matter what. So
Yeah. So the word Sufi, right? The word Sufi and the word Sufism comes from I don't want to say the root word, but the root core concept in Islam is tasawwuf, and the anglicized, that's the word, anglicized version of tasawwuf is Sufism. Now, tasawwuf comes from it's kind of synonymous with a number of other terms in the Islamic sciences tradition, or the tradition of the Islamic sciences. And many times, as one of my teachers, he kind of listed off a number of synonymous terms where he said that, Sufism or tasawwuf or tazkiyah or suluk or ihsan. Now, all these terms will translate them because, as Wakil and I were talking, we should mention the English terminology before we kind of go into Arabic terminology that we use if and when we use it in the future. But the thing is, all of these terms, like Wakil was mentioning, they're about treading the spiritual path, right? And unfortunately, the specific term tasawwuf or Sufism and then Sufis, by extension, get a bad rap because the term has been, what's a better word than hijacked?
I don't think there is a better term.
There isn't, right? It's been hijacked by those who don't really know what it is, and then they took it and ran with it or danced with it.
You want to cultural appropriation? Would that be appropriate as well?
Yeah, I guess they appropriated the term, right, by adding in certain practices within the faith that weren't found from within it. But the Quranic and Sunnaic terminology, so the Quran being the holy book of the Muslims, or the revealed book of the Muslims, and then the Sunnah, which is the practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. The term that's used there for the treading the spiritual path is ihsan, which translates to, or comes from the root word of being good or being beautiful or ameliorating. So ihsan is perfection or excellence. So that comes from the famous hadith or the famous prophetic narration of the angel Jibril, where the angel Gabriel asked the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, 4 questions. The first one was, what is Islam? The second was, what is Iman? So what is Islam? What is Islam? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he answered with the 5 pillars of faith. And then he asked him, what is Iman? What is belief? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, answered with the 6 pillars of belief. And then he asked him, what is ihsan? What is perfection in worship? Or what is excellence in worship? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the incredibly succinct and genius way that he responded was, it's that you worship God as though you see him. And if you cannot see him, then know that he sees you. And I think that's a very all-encompassing way, and that is the way that our scholars or our shuyukh, our ulama, have extracted from the to get to the meanings of tasawwuf and Sufism and ihsan, which is really worshipping our Creator in a way that we can almost physically understand that his presence is there, and if not, then know that he sees and watches over everything that we do. So that's where the origin comes from. Do you want to comment and add anything onto that? I don't want to spend too much time going into that, but just kind of giving like a bit of a background.
I think also another part is like in terms of like the appropriation is that not only did they add things, but a lot of people took away things. And so here, particularly in the West or even in America, where we have like these goofy Sufis, as some of my teachers like to call them, they completely removed the Islam aspect of it, right? The spiritual teachings that they are working with only work in conjunction with Islamic practices and teachings. So there is no true connection with God without those things that he told you to do first, right? So without your daily prayer, there's no real strong spiritual connection with God, right? Without you fasting in the month of Ramadan, there's no strong connection with God, so on and so forth, right?
So without
And
the,
so
would you say, like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but so we have that pillar or that aspect of Islam with a capital I, which is ihsan, which is this excellence, which is this tasawwuf and spirituality. But that is something that is completely intertwined and interconnected with the pillars of practice, which we do via our limbs. And for Muslims, those are those 5 pillars of practice that are very well known. And because it's not an Islamic educational podcast, we don't want to go into all of the details. And then also incredibly intertwined with the pillars of belief, which are the intellectual or mental manifestations of Islam. So we've got like the pillars of practice and the pillars of belief, and then there is that aspect of excellence or beautification of both of those.
yeah, and it's pretty much just like the refining of the soul, right? The soul is like a very powerful command, the Amr of Allah, the command of Allah. It's such a powerful thing. We all have a soul, but just to refine it and put it in complete obedience, that's pretty much what that spiritual path is all about. And that actually goes into the word Sufi, like you were talking about the core concept, where it came from, the core idea of where the terminology came from Tasawwuf. One other root of that was like Suf, right? Of wool. And so these people who were treading this spiritual path, sometimes it includes minimalism. So they completely abandoned their worldly possessions and even worldly comforts, including wearing wool clothing. So that's where Suf means wool, and then because they used to wear wool, and
because it was a
pretty much
coarse material and difficult, as opposed to very soft, like silky or even cottony materials, because it was something that was inexpensive and difficult for them, for the body to actually handle, right?
Yeah, accustomed to. Yeah, exactly. And so that's also another part of it. And just like how we have like different schools of thought in terms of our daily practices, and we don't need to really list amongst those. There's also spiritual paths that have their own particular schools of thought. So the wool wearing spiritual path, there are some people like that. Some people also wear very nice and elegant clothing because of them showing the blessings that God has given them. And another one is exclaiming loudly, right? And this is our dhikr, our remembrance, those words that they would repeat many times over, praising God. Some of them do it very loudly. That's a part of their school of thought. And then some of them do it very quietly or even silent. You can't even hear it. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of nuances when it comes down to what actually treading that path is. And myself, I'm an amateur in this path. I don't know how experienced you are, Bilal, but that's pretty much where it comes from. But the thing is, whether you are consciously or unconsciously doing it, you're on the path. You're on the path no matter what. It's just a matter of refining yourself, bring yourself to that obedience to those core concepts.
Yeah, what was really interesting, just to build on that, and then I have a question. For some of the programs that I'm doing for my students, and again, or for the first time, I guess, to clarify, I have to say students, and I don't mind saying students. I used to call, when I started off as a 23-year-old, I used to call, these 18 to 22-year-olds kids, because anyone younger than me, I refer to them as a kid. But then gradually, trying to work with that, a sense of professionalism, I referred to students as students. And then other people, when I address or when I talk about my students at work, they think that I'm a professor. And but no, my students, in terms of, because I hold classes, each and every one of us should be a teacher in some way, shape, or form. Of course, Wakil, you are at a minimum a teacher to your 2 children, inshallah. But one of my students, I finished one program, and I was taking feedback as to what the next program I should start, or what the next topic we should cover. And one of the books, or the book that I started last week, was A Reformation of Character, which I think you're very familiar with. It's by newer publications. I mean, I don't mind pushing them, or I don't mind plugging them, but that's from the writings of, I have it right here, It's from the writings of Hadrat Maulana Hakim Muhammad Akhtar, of the Indian subcontinent. So exactly what you were talking about, reformation of character. My student, he was like, so what we've been doing the past few semesters, so this is just another book on like reformation of character, on like character building. So how's that different from, what we've been covering in the past? And I think what people fail to realize is that this is not something that happens overnight or over the course of one semester, right? And I'm sure that, or I'm hoping that this student will probably listen to this, and this is in no way a slight to him, but of course this is something that is a lifelong journey, that we can't say that we've reformed our character and become perfect people, but the aspiration and the intention should be that we should perfect our character to the greatest extent possible, because otherwise, I don't know, this is my personal opinion in life. Although I'm not a perfect person, I strive to be a perfect person. I hold myself to that sort of standard.
For sure. I mean, it's cradle to grave, first breath to last breath, right? That's all our life journey is, to just reform and better ourselves and leave a lasting impact, right?
And it's a form of growth. I mean, a lot of people, they'll say like a kind of cliched adage of like, you need to be, if you're not, you need to be like constantly growing as a person. Well, if you're not growing as a person in terms of your spiritual excellence and your spiritual navigation and treading down that spiritual path, and a huge portion of that is refining and reforming your character, then what is it that you're actually doing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So the question that I had before I forget it, and you had mentioned this, that you don't know how much experience that I have along this spiritual path. One of the questions that I had gotten in terms of feedback was, so are you a Sufi? So why don't we address that head on? So are you, Wakil, are you a Sufi? And or let's clarify that. Let's make that like a two-part question, because we could easily say yes to the first. Are you a Sufi? Question one. And question two, are you part of a Sufi order, or what's known as a tariqah?
Oh, that sounds pretty cool, Sufi order. Well, I think that's also why we put like the prefix of Savage Sufi on there. One part is like reclaiming the word, right? Sufi. So if you ask me if I'm a Sufi and then somebody just cuts out this 30 seconds and I said yes, be like, oh, this guy, he left the fold of Islam. He's a deviant, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I would like to say with like context and conditional statement, yeah, I'm a person that practices upon tasawwuf, this treading the spiritual path. And in terms of like spiritual orders or like which group I would acknowledge with, I am not. So there's a process called bay'ah, which is like allegiance or pledging towards or being connected to a spiritual teacher. Unfortunately, I do not have a fixed teacher. So that means I'm just going wild, right? Buck wild. I have no true guidance, but I do have exposure to the Chisti Tariqa, which is one very famous one in the South subcontinent, and another one which is the Naqshbandi Tariqa, which is very common, some more around Turkey area, but also it's prominent in the subcontinent as well, with a little bit of exposure to Qadiri Tariqa. And so names sound kind of funny. Most people like probably like tuning out like, oh, what are these words? They're mostly from like a specific location or the last name of the person, or something notable that happened. So it's not necessarily like a group, or like there's not real definition, right? Abdul Qadir Jilani, that's where the Qadiris are usually from. And then the Chistis actually attribute themselves back to Ali radhiyallahu anhu, and Naqshbandi, Mujaddid al-Fasani. This is where they go back to. So I'm a little bit here and there. I don't have a teacher, but I'm always willing to learn this.
And I think all of the spiritual paths, all of the different orders, they go back to the fourth caliph, our master Ali, Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu. May God be pleased with him and ennoble his face. Who was the cousin and the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was the fourth caliph. But I think I just mentioned that. He was someone who was known for his chivalry, and which is another word I think that was appropriated because the Islamic terminology for that was futuwa, and I believe if I remember correctly, the aspect of Islamic chivalry or futuwa, that was that's actually the origin for like the Knights of the Round, like Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and chivalry that existed in the European continent. I mean, everything goes back to Islam. A lot of things, right? And if not, everything goes back to Islam. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, so you mentioned three different Sufi orders or tariqas, and off the top of my head, I remember a fourth one. Excuse me, which is the Shadili tariqa, and that's the founder of that tariqa. The founder of that Sufi order is, I believe, Abu Hassan al-Shadili.
Yeah.
We can double check that.
Yeah, I believe so. And I think the Naqshbandis are, they actually say that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is the foundation of their spiritual path. So a lot of these spiritual paths come from Ali radiallahu anhu, the fourth Khalifa. But the Naqshbandis, they claim that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is the first Khalifa, the first Caliph, is the founder and the role model pretty much for their way of zikr, of remembrance.
Cool. Yeah, I think I might have known that and might have forgotten it. So yeah, thank you for the clarification and the correction.
Yeah, my brother probably would beat me if if I didn't put that little asterisk there. So
yeah, I mean, you not to go back into bios. So you're the eldest, right, of four brothers, and two of your younger brothers are, mashallah, Islamic scholars.
yeah, I'm the black sheep.
And actually, one of Wakil's brothers, when he came to Boston, although I had been studying privately and trying to run around to our different local scholars, because of my connection with Wakil, I kind of pestered Wakil's younger brother, and so I've been studying with him for the last 4 years as well. So I asked people for their du'as and their well wishes and their prayers, because he's done a lot of service. He's a really good guy, inshallah.
Yeah, we'll put it on here. I think you studying 4 years with him has been more years than I've studied with him, so that's definitely notable. It's either he doesn't want to teach me, or I'm probably not the best student.
I think it's difficult to learn from siblings.
You're right. Yeah.
There's this weird ego thing. We'll learn from our parents, but we won't learn from our siblings.
It's also thing. I'm like the older brother, so
yeah.
It's like a mental, like psychological thing that somebody younger than you is telling you something, and one of my first reactions, and this is like something I need to work on, is like I will always debate a point. So it's not that I won't admit that I'm wrong. I'll just debate it, right? I'm a very big fan of like devil's advocate.
Yeah, I get that.
We're on the spiritual path and we're talking about being devil's advocate. It's just.
So one point about that, because I like that thing that you brought up, because our idea for our next, or my idea at least for our next episode, I think we should maybe stem off of what you just mentioned, but in terms of like that debating that point and willing to admit that you're wrong but still debating. But you said that the thing about learning from someone who's younger than you. Now, I'm not saying I'm trying not to say this with any sort of trying to one up you at all. But I'm older than you, and your brothers are younger than you are. So I'm still studying with someone who's a few years younger than me, and it's kind of interesting. I like it because it's the benefit that we have from teachers that are older than us, that they have that sort of that yearly seniority, or that age seniority, but at the same time, studying with someone who's younger, then you also start to go through material a little bit quickly, which I've particularly enjoyed. And I think Imam Shakil and I, we get along because we share the same sort of weird nerdiness for like grammar and these other the other disciplines of Islam. We just kind of nerd out on them. Although I think he nerds out on them a little bit more than I do, and I think I nerd out more on the interlanguage pun play.
Yeah, I think he's. It's just something that comes with experience.
Mm.
It's just a matter of like, he's like, oh yeah, I know all the jokes and the jokes that are gonna come after, and that's why he's laughing because you're not there yet. Uh, but yeah, and I think going back to our topic in terms of like how to better ourselves and like what this path actually is, and that's one of the things is that you learn from somebody who's younger than you, right? It defeats the self, the ego, the nafs,
Mm.
um, because we don't like to be told we're wrong, and we don't like to be put down by others, and especially people who are technically quote unquote beneath us, whether it's in age or power or whatever. And that humility and humbleness that you get from that, you can't pay for that experience, right? You can't attain it any other way other than just by doing it.
Yeah.
And without going too deep in another story or just going off track, but like the little time that I did spend in madrasa, the kid was he's a Molana now actually, but at that time I think he was like uh, maybe like half my age, and he was teaching me my first couple subaks, like my first couple lessons that I was giving to him, and he was correcting my Quran, and he was appointed by my main teacher, which I won't name him right now. We can do it in another podcast, but I went to learn under him, and he appointed one of his students to teach me. So that humility and humbleness that you get from those interactions definitely means a lot,
Mm.
and that's not something you can really experience anywhere else. And you can't pay for it. You can't get it any other way other than just by doing it.
Mm. Very true. Because you really need to push yourself for that. And I also really like the way that you translated nafs, and you called it ego. And that's something that I've heard one of my other teachers, Sheikh Khalil Abdul Rashid, who's also, mashallah, a remarkable person. Um, I can't sing his praises enough and his accolades enough. Or Dr. Khalil, Dr. Sheikh Khalil. He also translates nafs as the ego, because sometimes we kind of conflate, and this is something that's a problem in, uh, I want to say like very objectively, like denotatively using the word problem or issue in Islamic terminology, in that when we try to translate from English or from Arabic to English, we kind of use the same words for things that have, slightly different technical meanings. And we usually translate nafs and ruh as the same thing. And nafs is more like the ego, is something that needs to be suppressed. And then ruh is our soul, our spirit.
Yeah, like those connotations that you're talking about, like the word chivalry, right? Chivalry. I mean, I'm a history nerd when it comes to this type of stuff. So when you're talking about like chivalry, and you attribute it back to the Round Table, the Knights of the Round Table with King Arthur and all that, and that's a specific code and way of life.
Mm.
And chivalry, in that specific definition, there are some aspects that we can claim that is Islamic, and others that we can't claim that is Islamic. Same way, like if we were doing this in Japanese and maybe we chose a different word, it would be bushido, right? The samurai's way, or
Mm.
the code of samurai would do. And that's also kind of like a problem whenever we are trying to explain some of these more complex words, is there's not really a word you can 100% translate what the essence of that meaning is. And that's something that we struggle with. And same thing, like on the spiritual path, like yeah, I've heard nafs as like base desires, base self, ego, and which if we acknowledge the ego, then it goes into the id, and then it goes into all these other types of things. So it just spirals everywhere. But basically we're all just trying to remove our bad qualities and make them good, and we can never truly remove our bad qualities. I guess it's just to improve upon them and
Mm.
make them obedient or subservient to ourselves. It's like basically becoming the master of yourself,
Mm.
and that's pretty much what conquering the nafs is.
Yeah, so you can bridle your ego and control it.
Yeah, because you can't be without an ego too. But anyway, that's a separate
Yeah, that's it.
topic altogether. I think
Maybe we'll
we're
leave
done
that.
long enough.
I think we should leave that, and then also maybe we should touch upon, maybe the next time, about the conversation about terms, because that, I think that has to do a lot with how we converse, uh, and have conversations with one another. Because if we don't settle on common terms, then it gets really difficult to actually have a proper conversation that leads to anything productive or beneficial. But so that we can circle back and maybe wrap up this episode, since we're getting toward the end of the time that I think you and I wanted to keep these two. So we talked about Sufi, the word Sufi, and its origins, and kind of did an exposition on that. Now let's just try to wrap up in the last few minutes about the word savage, right? And why you kind of thought about savage, and why we've stuck with and kind of went with savage Sufis.
Savage Sufis. So it goes down to basically when you do read these spiritual texts written by these people who are helping you fix yourself, more commonly to like self-help books like 7 Good Habits or whatever of your life you can improve yourselves. Sometimes you have to say something straightforward to you, and there's no beating around the bush at all, right? It's not about like we care about your feelings. This is the hard, cold facts. And in that harshness, sometimes that reality that they expose to you, it kind of like tears right into you, and that's where the savageness of the Sufis come from. So there's like a very famous author in South Africa. He will compare anything and everything to an animal and how it like does its life. Like, so he'll say, "Oh, you're just like a donkey and just pissing in the middle of the road." It's a very harsh statement. It's a very raw statement. It's not the most pretty statement. It's not vulgar, but at the same time,
it gets to the point.
It means something. It gets to the point. Exactly. There's like a whole bunch of that stuff, or like even with the original intro of the show, we wish that our mothers washed us out. That's a little bit more vulgar, but it's a point, right? Like that goes back to the core point of like the tasawwuf and spirituality, that a life that there's no good in, you rather have not lived it rather than being born and live that life. Does that make sense? So that's where that savageness comes from. And so sometimes like a lot of the scholars of the past, what they would say is that I wish I was born as a hair on the body of an animal, so I wouldn't be accounted for the sins that I've committed or the mistakes that I've done. And that's where that original phrase came from. Like, you rather your mother washed you out and never be born than do the mistakes that you did. But hey, we're living this life right now, and let's move forward. And that's where the savageness comes from. Straight, raw, in your feelings, without any beating around the bush. And the reason why we have to put the word savage, and this goes back to how we first started the podcast, is that this word has been appropriated. It's with pacifists and pushovers and people who only talk about love, but they don't talk about the harms and the problems and the fire and all the other types of things. So it's to reclaim that word, and just we put savage in front of it because that's just to identify ourselves. It's kind of like, well, this is the controversial topic, like Sunni and Shia, like how did they get their name? It's because one identified themselves and the other one had to identify themselves with another name. So it's to separate ourselves, identify ourselves, and just acknowledge our core concepts and beliefs. But I'm a nice guy overall. I'm not gonna say anything mean. The savageness doesn't always mean mean either.
I think I'm kind of the opposite. I think a lot of my students can attest to this, that I'm pretty savage when it comes to character reformation. I take that sort of savage Sufi approach. What kept going through my mind when you're just speaking was trying to get directly to the point, and if you have some sort of bad characteristic, that should kind of be called out, not necessarily in a vulgar way, but in a very direct way. And as we know, like geometrically speaking, the shortest distance between 2 points, right, is a straight line. So why literally beat around the bush or draw a squiggle or whatnot when you can see the target and you can acquire the target, and the target is something you need to remove? Just like address it head on.
Exactly. Definitely. That's what it is. If you have bad character, you have bad character. Just say it straight. You talk too much. You're a backbiter. And
then
you're a liar.
You know what the problem is, and then you can go about like handling the problem.
Yeah, and that's what that is. Just identify the problem with the shortest path and just get to work.
I think one thing, and this will be my final thought, and I'll let you wrap it up, Wakil. was it years ago? I believe it was November of 2013. I remember I went to a conference, a chaplain's conference, in Hartford, and there was someone who I considered to be a mentor and a teacher that I've known since I was 16 years old, who was also a chaplain elsewhere, and then two other colleagues who were there, who were all three other colleagues, sorry, who were there, and the discussion. I mean, I was kind of early on in this game of chaplaincy and dealing with students and kind of trying to navigate how what my role is and how I should be dealing with students and whatnot. And the conversation that was going on, my colleagues are my elders, they're 10 plus years older than me and people who I look up to and have experienced both, like, in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their practice, in terms of their careers as chaplains, and just like people, they're good, solid people. They made the remarks that the conversation was circling around nowadays a lot of students are, I'm inserting this word because I can't remember the exact conversation verbatim, it was almost 7 years ago. I'm saying I'd like to say that they're kind of coddled. A lot of us are coddled nowadays, and the proper traditional manner and methodology of tasawwuf, of like really getting to really reforming one's character by calling out those problematic traits. Those are things that people nowadays in general, and the conversation at that time was about students that these fellow chaplains of mine were dealing with, or or dealt with on a regular basis. They were saying, my students can't handle that. Like, if I tell them we're going to go through, we're going to go through like diseases of the heart, that's not something they can handle. People want to be told that, like, you're such a great person,
you're perfect the way you are.
Yeah. That's why I love Dwight from The Office. There's this specific clip where Pam is pregnant for the second time, and then they're all talking about the characters in The Office. They're all talking about how she has such a special glow, and then they start talking about some other things, and then Dwight gets up and he's like, no, what we're talking about is disgusting. There are universally agreed upon standards of beauty, and you all are corrupting those, or messing those up just to mollycoddle a pregnant woman. And I was like, I need to find a way to make a GIF out of this, because this is basically what happens everywhere. Not to say that I completely 100% agree with the fact that there's one a universally agreed upon standards of beauty. There's changes amongst cultures and whatnot, but I think that same concept can kind of apply. And I mean, that was in a TV show 10 years ago, which is no longer politically correct for the most part.
Yeah, we don't mind non-politically correct. It's okay. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. It's just sometimes we're just sort of, I mean, we're gonna go on for like an hour.
Yeah,
but
I mean, we're at the 46 minute mark. But the one thing that I wanted to mention about that, right, was immediately thereafter in the episode of The Office, Pam really appreciated that, and she was saying that Dwight is the only person who's going to tell me the truth. So there's a real wisdom, I think, behind this being direct. There's a time for gentleness, and there's a time for kind of beating around the bush a little bit, but there's also like a time for being direct with people. And I think it's really important that we understand that and incorporate that into our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So
I think that's a good place to wrap this up.
So as we're closing out, what you and I discussed before was that our next episode, our intentions are to talk about how to have a conversation, how to maybe model a conversation. We won't probably model, we'll just have our conversation. And I think we don't agree on everything, but we still are able to have great conversations. I think this was a good conversation. I learned from it. But there's a lot of problems when it comes to actually how people can actually have a conversation when they don't necessarily see eye to eye. So how to have a conversation about difficult topics, and maybe also defining our terms and how we can actually, come to a conversation equipped to, walk away with benefit. We're thinking about going in that direction, but of course we're open to feedback.
Suggestions. Oh yeah, feedback. Yeah, better
Feedback.
word.
Oh, I mean, feedback would be great, and then suggestions for upcoming topics, because we will soon run out, and then I'm gonna have to listen to you talk about Pokemon or anime or whatnot, and that's something that, although I love you, I have absolutely no interest in.
That's perfectly fine. It's okay. But people are requesting a amateur exorcist story time, so we can do one of those too. But first we'll do the conversation, and then we'll do the exorcism jinn topic as Halloween draws near.
We'll definitely do that, and we'll record that one when it's still daylight out, so that I don't get afraid at night.
Oh, trust me, I'm plenty afraid at night.
Okay.
Those bumps in the night, something different to me. Anyway.
All right, so we have to figure out how. We didn't talk about how we're going to close this out, so we're going to have to do some editing, I think. But how do you think we should close out?
I don't know how podcasts work, so like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Sounds good to me. Take care, everyone.
All right, bye.